Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week, in honor of the 250th anniversary of the United States being a country, we are going to be taking a look at the history of 4th of July celebrations and how fireworks came into the mix. Looking at our revolutionary past, the 4th of July has its significance as the day that the Congress would formally adopt the Declaration of Independence. The signing was signified by the ringing of the Liberty Bell at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. So the Declaration was adopted on the 4th of July, but at the time of its adoption, no one in the Continental Congress had actually signed the document yet. It wouldn't be until August 2nd, 1776, that most of the delegates would actually sign the Declaration. But what if I told you that the 4th of July was not initially the day that delegates such as John Adams forethought would be the day of future nationwide celebration? Originally, in a letter that he penned to his wife Abigail Adams, he wrote, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shoes, game, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other. From this time forward forevermore. You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph in the day's transactions. Even although we should rue it, which I trust in God we shall not." Now that is quite the admiration for July 2nd. So what happened on July 2nd that would have led John Adams to declare that this day would be the day to live on as the nation's day of celebration? Well, that would be the signing of the Lee Resolution. The Lee Resolution was introduced on June 7th, 1776 by Richard Henry Lee that quotes, "These united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states." The Lee Resolution was a rather short document that read as follows. Resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, that it is expedient forthwith to take the most effectual measures for forming foreign alliances, that a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration and approbation. So, in more simple terms, a plan to separate officially from the British Crown, a call to form foreign alliances, an act that would recognize the fledgling country as legitimate, and a plan for confederation, which just means that the new United States would be a political union of sovereign states with a common purpose, like defense, trade, and foreign policy. Now, this little tidbit is not related to the 4th of July, but I felt like you guys would enjoy this little fact. On the original document that is shown in the National Archives website, you can see that in the first line of this document, the word united was accidentally omitted. So they had to use one of those grammar correcting carets in between these and colonies to float the word united in the resolution. I will put up the picture on Instagram so you guys can see what I'm talking about, but I just thought it was interesting that one of our more important documents in our nation's founding has this kind of error and fix in it. Anywho, back to the resolution itself. On June 11th, 4 days after Lee had introduced the resolution, the Continental Congress had appointed 3 separate committees in response to the resolution. One to draft a Declaration of Independence, one to draw up a plan to actually form those foreign alliances, and another one to, quote, prepare and digest the form of a confederation. As the colonies had been rather independent in their existence, the representatives in the Continental Congress would have to go out and survey for how their colonies wanted to proceed with the idea of confederation. Some of the delegates believed that Lee's proposal was a little premature in the process, so they delayed voting until July 2nd, which prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Lee Resolution was the first official statement that the colonies intended to separate themselves from the Crown, which in turn would give them their independence. So I can see how John Adams would think that this day and this document would be the celebrated set. But the even bigger, more monumental adoption of the Declaration of Independence happened just 2 days later, and this document would be the one to travel from state to state and read to people. George Washington even had the Declaration read to his troops on July 9, 1776, in hopes that the troops would find new meaning in the war for independence that they were fighting. When it comes to celebrating the 4th of July as a holiday, a day to commemorate the war for independence, we can actually look back at several English celebration traditions that would have led the newly minted Americans to celebrate this day. Going all the way back to the 16th century, the people in the British Isles would start to use official and unofficial anniversaries as means of celebrating or to make political statements. There was quite a bit of controversy at the time surrounding church and state, and these celebrations or refusals to celebrate were a way for the people to make their own statements. During this time period, it was common to celebrate and create new holidays based on the king's birthday as a way to combine the king and the Church of England's alliance and create a new English identity, all while there were protests of saint days and feasts by the Protestant population. These traditions surrounding anniversaries and commemorating days like the king's birthday were brought into the colonies as British colonizers landed in North America. The colonizers continued to participate in these traditions, celebrating birthday holidays and important events, up until the 1760s when the colonies began courting the idea of revolution. As revolutionary fervor spread through the colonies, celebrations and parades were no longer safe for celebrating the king's birthday, but instead used to mark important events such as the repealing of the Stamp Act, further separating themselves from the British. With the publication of the Declaration of Independence, staged celebrations of independence started to spring up throughout the colonies. Multiple events happened congruently without the influence of modern media. In an article titled The Invention of the 4th of July by David Waldstreicher, he writes, "The Declaration had to thrust all blame onto the king, and its public proclamation set off a public symbolic murder and funeral for the king, an inversion of a king's birthday celebration." The celebrations that popped up around the colonies partook in the ringing of the bells and bonfires, which were both traditional aspects of the celebration of the king's birthday. By including these celebrating rituals in the celebration of the 4th of July, the people in the colonies were able to show their visible support for American independence and made it seem even more likely that the 13 colonies could be united as one nation. On the one-year anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there were the first organized 4th of July celebrations in Boston and Philadelphia. The Philadelphia celebration was described in the Pennsylvania Evening Post as such. Yesterday, the 4th of July, being the anniversary of the independence of the United States of America, was celebrated in this city with demonstrations of joy and festivity. About noon, all the armed ships and galleys in the river were drawn up before the city, dressed in the gayest manner with the colors of the United States and streamers displayed. At 1 o'clock, the yards being properly manned, they began the celebration of the day by a discharging of 13 cannons from each of the ships and one from each of the 13 galleys, in honor of the 13 United States. The evening was closed with the ringing of the bells, and at night there was a grand exhibition of fireworks, which began and concluded with 13 rockets on the commons, and the city was beautifully illuminated. Note the use of fireworks in the celebration. I'll be getting to those in just a bit. In the years after the War for Independence, patriots would celebrate the anniversary of American independence on July 4th. And with the war so recent, they would also celebrate battle victories in the early years of the nation when the U.S. was still learning to self-govern and made some changes to the structure of the nation. Those in charge would use the 4th of July as a national political party. They would hold parades, sermons, and toasts that included explicit political language to rally the nation together. These celebrations worked to maintain a revolutionary tradition. So now, knowing why exactly we celebrate the 4th and not any other day, let's look at the firework connection. Fireworks are almost synonymous with the 4th of July, with modern-day estimates of $1 billion being spent each 4th of July on fireworks. And fireworks have been around for a very long time, like 2,000 years of very long time. All the way back in 200 BCE in China, it was discovered that bamboo, when tossed in a fire, would explode with a loud bang, resulting from air pockets overheating the bamboo stalk. And just a casual 1,000 years later, in 800 CE, when gunpowder was discovered in China, did the first man-made fireworks appear. The firework was made from a hollowed-out piece of bamboo that was filled with explosive material. These first iterations could only be enjoyed at the ground level. As we learned how to use gunpowder to be more effective in warfare as a way to blast projectiles, we were also able to figure out how to make fireworks work in the air. And as the world started to become even more connected and there was an increase in travel between Europe and China, the fireworks made their way outside of China and were used in celebrations in England. The firework tradition also made its way to the colonies, where they would eventually be used in the 4th of July celebration. These firework celebrations would all be in orange color, as colored fireworks would not be invented until many decades later by adding metals such as strontium and barium to the gunpowder. As each year passed and the celebration continued, the use of fireworks would become more integral to the celebration, especially as fireworks would become readily available. After the War of 1812, where the US saw itself at war with England once again, the Independence Day celebration saw a new enthusiasm. Fireworks also became the explosive of choice after there were public safety concerns over the use of cannons and gunfire. And with that, that's where I'm going to end today's episode. Stay safe this 4th of July and enjoy those fireworks shows. I know I will be enjoying each and every firework I see this holiday. Sources for today's episode include an article from the National Park Service titled History of Independence Day, an article from George Washington's Mount Vernon titled The Earliest July 4th Celebration, and an article from History.com titled Why Do We Celebrate July 4th with Fireworks? Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me over on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.